Does Singapore math confuse you? Because it confuses a lot of people, and myself included, and it took some time for me to figure out what is the structure of Singapore math. Why are there so many different lines? There's a primary and a dimension and a primary 2020, and what's the difference between them, and what is appropriate for my homeschool or school? Well, let's take some time to review. Singapore math, the first line they have is called the primary math. Primary math. Now, primary math comes in 4 different editions, but we're just going to take a look at 3 for now. The first edition that we will look at is their standards edition. So the standards edition is almost an exact translation of the Singapore math, the original. So it's in English. It even uses the Canadian centimeters and kilometers, weights and measures. It does not use the American version of weights and measures. It uses the Canadian version. So for us Canadians, we like that. So standards is as close to the original Singapore math as possible, including the Canadian version of weights and measures. It meets the California school standards, which means if it's going to meet that, it's going to meet any school board. So in terms of meeting your school's requirements, this one will do that. But not only will it meet, it'll exceed that. It goes way above anything that's required. It's very highly academic. The next line they have is called the US edition. So the US edition is what you might expect. They've taken the standards edition and they've changed the weights and measures, and they've made them US, what the US would use. So they'll use miles and they'll use inches and feet instead of the original standards. Still meets the California School Board's requirements, which means it still meets all the requirements for any government requirements anywhere. And it's also very highly academic, and it has includes far more than would be required by a school. And finally, in the primary math, there is an edition called the Common Core. We'll just call it CC Common Core. That one was written to meet the requirements of the U.S. administration requiring math to meet Common Core. Now, we've made this decision easy for you. We actually don't even carry that one. We don't think it's necessary. So we're not going to go there. We're not concerned about meeting the Common Core requirements. So we've got primary math standards, US Common Core. Then they have another line which is somewhat of a collation of all 3 of these. So it meets the government standards, it has the US weights and measures, and it meets the Common Core standards. That one's called the dimensions. Okay, so that's dimensions math. Dimensions math, they've also taken out some of the instruction. So the original primary math, the original standard Singapore math involves order of operations and teaching a student how to come to a conclusion using various methods. Way more methods than they would be required to memorize, or to understand. But so dimensions math, it pulls in all of the requirements, but it takes out a little bit of that work. So it doesn't give them quite as much information. They don't need to have all of the information of how to come to a conclusion. Maybe we'll just take some of that out. So it's a little bit easier. It's a little less bulk to it. But it meets the requirements. If you're a homeschooler, I usually recommend dimensions math because it doesn't have as much book work. And if you're a school, sometimes you got to fill that time, and it's helpful. But at home, we're not necessarily worried about filling X amount of time. We just want to make sure that the student's understanding. These books, the books come in 2 sets. So there's an A set and a B set. A represents the first semester, B represents the second semester. Within the A's and the B's, you'll have a textbook and a workbook. And with the B, you have a textbook and a workbook. And there's also tests for that level. In addition, there's the home instructor guide, which I call the HIG, or the teacher guide. If you're in a school, so you'd want that one. So you can do a home instructor guide or a teacher's guide. That's the book structure for actually all of the primary and dimensions. As you can see, there can be a lot of work for the student. The textbook teaches the student the concept. The workbook has them working and doing drills and repeating and repeating and repeating. We love the model of Singapore Math, which is a mastery model where they present a concept and they have the student working on that concept over and over and over until they've mastered it, and then they'll move on to the next concept. That's the skeleton of those, the skeleton arrangement of those lines. But then last year, they came out with a new line, and that one's called Primary Math 2022.
It's almost below the camera now.
And this one's a bit of a game changer. So it still meets the requirements of the school boards. It's not going to be a problem, but it doesn't have nearly as many it doesn't have nearly as much information on how to resolve an equation. So you don't, if there are 5 ways to come to an answer, this one's not going to give you all 5. It's just going to give you exactly what you need to know, what the school boards would require. So it's brought it right down to need to know, that's it. That can be really helpful for students who either get it and they just don't need that drill, or students who don't need so much work because it just bores them and it discourages them and they just need to know. So this one's actually very helpful. Very helpful if you've tried Singapore Math and you felt like, no, there's just way too much going on. That's the purpose of the Primary Math 2022. This one comes in a student book alone. Just a student book, so there's no textbook, workbook. The student book has everything you need. If you decide, hey, we want a little more than that, you can add the book called Additional Practice. Additional practice will give you, as you might guess, additional practice. And if you feel like, no, we just need a little more, just to kind of meet the requirements of these other lines, just to kind of get that full mastery experience, you can add in the book called Mastery and Beyond. Okay, Mastery and Beyond. So as you can see, primary math has been simplified, both in the structure of the textbooks, but also in the content. So there you go. There's just a quick Coles Notes on Singapore Math. Let us know if you have any questions.